The winds have changed. They're starting to blow. The temperatures are dropping, and we're getting ready to hit the ice on the latest episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And work as a fantasy GM rolls on through our NHL-wide breakdown into Beantown, taking a look at these Boston Bruins. Let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I heard the music, and you know what time it is. It's time for your daily source for fantasy hockey news. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Monday edition. I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Steele Roden. And on this side of the microphone, it's your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. Salute, shout out, and much love to the everydayers holding us down, making us your first listen every single day. Right now, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the rest of August. And then we're back 5 episodes a week in September, full court press, full ice press, whatever you want to say for this fantasy draft season. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. All summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus every single day. That's right. Something for everybody every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and get started right now. Mr. Roden, over to you, because look, I feel like the Boston Bruins have been one of those teams for obvious reasons that I think we've talked about quite a bit, and the themes are still going to hold true. Is there enough depth up the middle? Is Elias Lindholm enough to resurrect what has been 2 good seasons spoiled by the Florida Panthers in the postseason? Over to you. Top 5 list, slam dunk at number 1 again. But after that, let's have a conversation. Who you looking at? Who do you like on this list?
Yeah, slam dunk at number 1, and it's very easy situation. You know, you and I have been wrong about the Boston Bruins over the last 2 seasons,
Yes.
Embarrassingly so.
Yes,
wrong about the
Let's
Boston
get that out of the
Bruins.
way early.
Yeah, we got to admit when we're wrong out here on the podcast.
Yeah.
So we were wrong about the Boston Bruins. We saw them taking a slight dip in production. We saw them taking a slight dip in the standings. However, they have one of the best seasons ever a couple of years ago, and then they still are a playoff team last year. So they're getting it done, even though they didn't have the center depth that we knew. You know, they didn't have the center depth that a lot of the teams in the Atlantic have right now, but they still got it done with Pavel Zacha down the middle. You know, a couple of young guys down the middle as well. Even without Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, they're able to get things done very well, might I add. And most of that came from having one of the best tandem, if not the best tandem, in Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark last year. But like you said, slam dunk at number 1. David Pastrnak is the first Boston Bruin target that you'll be looking for from this Bruins organization for your fantasy team. He's also a first round draft pick, and there's been talks, you know, where exactly does he finish? He could be a top 5 player depending on how you look at it from last year. He could maybe slide down a little bit, you know, to maybe the 8th or 9th pick. That's where he finished last year. But David Pastrnak, for me, is right there at the number 5 or number 6. You know, again, when we actually get into the mock drafts later in the month of August, as well as going into September and October for the brand new fantasy hockey season, we'll break it all down exactly where this player will finish. But he's a first round draft pick. He's top 10, top 8 at least, and he gets it done so well offensively now. 110 points from David Pastrnak last year, going to be 28, or he is 28 years old. You know, second best career, second season with 110 plus points, 47 goals. This guy's a 40 goal machine right now. He did have the 61 goal season 2 seasons prior, but this is 4 seasons in his NHL career of 45 or 40 plus goals in a season, getting over 19, close to 20 minutes of average ice time, shoots the puck a lot, 382 shots last year, 70 hits. The shooting percentage has always been very steady throughout his NHL career, but you got to love what this guy brings fantasy-wise. There's not really much else I have to say. He's a first-round draft pick.
2 things come to mind when I think about David Pastrnak, and you alluded to them both. Lethally accurate shooting, one of the best shooters in the game, hands down, and consistency. You know what you're getting with David Pastrnak, and that makes him, Steele, a very attractive fantasy piece. Also, fairly durable player. I know back-to-back years at 82. He's in there almost every single night for a majority of his career. You love that as well. anything that happens with the Boston Bruins and it doesn't pan out, it likely isn't going to be David Pasternak's fault. However, there is a lot of burden on this player steal to be the straw that stirs the drink in Boston. Do I think he can do it? 100%. But I want to talk about some of these other pieces on the list, and let me get it out of the way, right away, because Jeremy Swayman comes in at number 2 on my list, and I know goalies for you and I usually don't finish this high. I'm just really loving this player, and I understand a lot of people out there are saying the security blanket of Linus Ullmark not being there. What does that mean for the Boston Bruins overall? I'm not sure. But to me, Jeremy Swayman, the 44 games that he played last year, add 10, add 15. This guy's going to be in the cage for a lot more games. He's going to get the reins. Are the Boston Bruins going to be able to get him more wins just because he's in there more? I'm going to say his value goes up. So he's at number 2 for me. And when you look at his numbers, because all of the numbers you brought up about Pasta, there's nothing to be said here. Jeremy Swayman has been proving that he should be the guy in Boston. Allmark's now in Ottawa. Hit me with your take on this, because he was solid in the playoffs last year. He has been nothing but sensational during his regular season career. 132 game steal, almost a .920 save percentage, 2.34 goals against, and almost 15 shutouts. So my bad, 12 shutouts. But still, I'm rounding up. Jeremy Swayman, stud goaltender, top 10 fantasy option for sure. And for me, he's coming second off the board. I understand there's a couple other names here, but I'm just investing a little bit more heavily into goaltenders than you. And I really do like Swayman for a big season this year.
Yeah, it's definitely close. And Jeremy Swayman, I expect big things from him, getting more starts, like you said, maybe close to 60 games played or game starts this upcoming season for the Bruins. It's for sure close for me. I'm going with Brad Marchand as the second fantasy target off the list of the Boston Bruins. He actually might have been one of the best picks last year, value-wise, for where he was getting drafted consistently. Looking at his ADP, he was getting drafted in the 12th round. He was getting drafted 128th overall last season in fantasy leagues, and he ended up finishing 40th. He was a top 50 player. He was 40th at the end of the regular season in fantasy point rankings. Another guy who just seems to get it done, a guy that you always want to have on your team but never want to play against, both fantasy-wise and in real life.
It's true.
And 67 points for Brad Marchand. I actually thought it was still a down year for this player. But yeah, from where he was getting drafted on his ADP to where he finished, he was an absolute stud. The value proved itself last year. Full 82 games, 67 points. He had 78 penalty minutes. He's a Banger League beauty. 115 hits, 35 blocks, 14% shooting percentage on 207 shots. And he's not just a power play savant as well. I couldn't think of a word. I couldn't think of a word, but he's getting it done. He's getting it done on the power play, but he also had 3 short-handed goals last season. So he's getting it done on the penalty kill as well. He's a dual eligible player. He does both the penalty kill and the power play. I love Brad Marchand. If he's on your team, not for when you play against him, like I said, but it's close with Jeremy Swayman because he's going to be getting a lot more of the starts, obviously, over Jonas Korpisalo. He's going to get close to 60 games this next year. You don't want to push him too much because we saw what that did to Jake Ottinger a couple of seasons ago, especially not having Linus Ullmark to back you up anymore and being in that rotation. Again, it's going to be a little bit of a different feel for Jeremy Swayman. For me, it's very close. Swayman comes in at number 3, but Brad Marchand beats it because, again, like you said, you're putting a little bit more emphasis on goaltenders. I'm putting a little bit more emphasis on the offensive production and offensive side of things, but Marchand at number 2 for me.
I got Marchand at 3. Let's talk about him a little bit more after the break. Got to talk about some of these new additions, the blue line. Let's also talk about perhaps a sneaky little breakout candidate steal. We're breaking down the rest of the NHL, and then we got mock drafts, lists, top positional players, under the radar targets, breakout candidates, you name it. This is your source for fantasy draft season. We'll talk about a whole lot more right after the break. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. The sports, they're coming in hot and heavy. We got hockey, NFL, NBA, all en route, and all summer long, customers are getting hooked up with a bonus daily at FanDuel. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long, and even into the fall when things get hot and heavy. FanDuel is your source. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. For your second listen, please go enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with national perspective on all things NHL each and every day with national experts and local insight on every single team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Continue to hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that support. Flip, over to you, my friend. You had Brad Marchand at the number 3 position from this Boston Bruins organization.
Yep.
Look, very strong players with just a little, we take a little bit of a inconsistency there. We switch those players, but we're on the same page.
And take a look at this, because Brad Marchand actually also got it done in the postseason. And you and I have covered this angle about the last memory that GMs have of a player is obviously how they did in the postseason. Brad Marchand carried the Boston Bruins offensively through a couple of games against the Leafs in the first round. He had 10 points through 11 games. Obviously, this team has bowed out to the best team in the NHL and arguably the best team over the last number of years, the Florida Panthers, one of the best. And 2 historically good seasons, Steele, and then you lose in the fashion that you do. I know it's the Florida Panthers, and maybe it being the Cup champs helps a little bit. The pressure is on in Beantown. I just want to get that out of the way right now. Jim Montgomery is going to be under the gun to get this team out of the second round this year, and realistically, I love Elias Lindholm. Let's talk about him in a few minutes. Zadorov on the back end. This is a beastly blue line. Every single one of their guys back there, Steele, plays with a physical edge. They're 6'1" or bigger, and they will be a physical team. I'm just a little worried about that depth. And here you and I go again. 3 years in a row, we've been waiting for the drop-off, and it hasn't happened. But what has happened, Steele, is they've gotten very close once again to really just get dusted aside by the Panthers both years. So the pressure is on. What does that mean for guys like Brad Marchand, who comes in at 3 for me? I think nothing but more of bringing the goods. And I don't have any concerns with this team in terms of their fantasy value. These 5 players on this list, I like them all. It's just, are they good enough? Are they deep enough? Charlie Coyle, Matthew Poitras, those kinds of guys up the middle that are going to have to anchor the 3rd and 4th lines going up against the Rangers, the Carolina Hurricanes, some of these beast teams in the East. That's where my questions come up for this team. That will all be answered in due time. However, I got Marchand at 3, and I think it makes sense then that Charlie McAvoy comes in at number 4. That's who I have at number 4. Charlie McAvoy's bringing a ton of peripheral category value, Steele. I know you're going to like that. How about 86 penalty minutes, 159 blocks, 159 hits, which is also weird. He is still eating 24 minutes a night. Hit me with your take on McAvoy, because when it comes to safe choices on this team, McAvoy, obviously the top defensive target. He comes in at number 4 for me, but hit me with your take on that.
Yeah, Charlie McAvoy comes in at number 4 for me as well. And like you said, he fills out the peripherals very, very steadily. You know, I would like to see a little bit more from him in the shot category as that number 1 defenseman. I would like to see him get close to at least 170, 180 shots on net. That hasn't been part of his game throughout the NHL career. His career high 166 shots just 3 seasons ago. Again, another thing that's really bothered me about this player is he's also struggled with injuries every single season. I don't think he's ever played a full 82 game. Yeah, he's never played a full 82 games. The closest he's ever got was in the 2021-22 season where he played 78. So yeah, he missed 4 games, but throughout his NHL career, just looking at this, 63 games played, 54 games played, 67 games played, and then 74 last year. So there's always some injury concern with this player. And that seems that really does bother me, because you know, even though there's the value there with what he brings in categorical leagues, even fantasy formats of fantasy points, he's going to bring it on a nightly basis. But you would like to see the health and him be there on a game-to-game basis, where that just seems to be a concern right now. But like you said, Banger League beauty, 86 penalty minutes, 159 hits, 159 blocks, getting over or close to 25 minutes of average ice time last year. That's over 2.5 minutes up from the year prior. He was also shooting at a 9% shooting percentage, which he hasn't done since his rookie season back in 2017. And this is another player that, when you look at where he was taken ADP, I think a lot of GMs out there like to reach on him because of the household name that he brings, honestly,
Sure.
and the team that he plays for. His ADP was 4.9 last year. He was getting drafted 48th, 49th overall in
Feels a bit
fantasy
high.
leagues, and I just don't see that that's where he should be. I think that's a massive reach for Charlie McAvoy. I think there's a lot of other players that you could take ahead of this guy. He finished just in front of the top 100 in fantasy at the end of the regular season. He finished 98th overall in fantasy points last year. I think a lot of GMs out there like to reach on this player. Again, there's nothing wrong with drafting him, but I definitely think you can wait until at least the 7th round to draft Charlie McAvoy. For me, there's a lot more value in some other defensemen out there, as well as just going after the offensive side of things with some forwards.
I think it's one of those situations as well that sometimes, and what am I going to say, separate how good he is on the ice for this team winning games and what he does for fantasy teams. Because after David Pastrnak, it's Charlie McAvoy who is so essential to this team's success. Sure, you could throw in the goaltender as well. We talked about Swayman. It's McAvoy and Pastrnak that anchor this team at the front and back. And sometimes you got to separate what they do on the ice in terms of getting this team wins and what it means in terms of putting up fantasy value. 133 shots, considering how I think he could be shooting the puck steal. You already highlighted it. Totally agree with you. I like him at number 4. I like our list. Here we go. It's the exact same. Let's just spit out number 5, perhaps right after the break. We'll talk about a breakout candidate. You tell me what you want to do. I'm intrigued to hear who you have at number 5.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Some new additions to this Boston Bruins team, but we'll get to all of that and more coming up next. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. We're up and at 'em early today.
Yes, sir.
On today's Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review, Flip it. I appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday. Only 3 episodes per week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like Flip said. Off the top of the episode, over to our 5th player, Flip.
Yes.
Some new additions to the squad. Elias Lindholm gets picked up by the Bruins. Nikita Zadorov gets picked up by the Bruins. Jonas Korpisalo. I don't think we're going to mention Korpisalo whatsoever about being a top 5 fantasy target. Zadorov probably not as well. To me, there's only 2 players to look at right now. How do we feel that Elias Lindholm is going to fit in the top 6 forward group, playing alongside David Pastrnak, playing alongside the likes of Brad Marchand, Pavel Zacha, Morgan Geekie, all those players, or do we go with a guy who's actually been a little bit overlooked and undervalued over the last couple of seasons, fantasy-wise? Charlie Coyle has been one of those guys who has kind of flown under the radar, fantasy-wise. Actually, even in the NHL on the level, career year last year, 60 points in 82 games, really a stepping out season for him. 131 hits, 60 blocks, 147 shots, 5 game-winning goals, a little bit on the power play you like to see, only 11 power play points, but he had 4 shorthanded assists. He also had a shorthanded goal, so he does have that, dual eligibility of playing on the power play and the PK. Finished actually 3rd on the ranking for Boston Bruins player. It went David Pastrnak at 9th at the end of the season, his season ranking. Then Brad Marchand 40th and Charlie Coyle 69th. So he was the 3rd Boston Bruins player on the list for fantasy target or for fantasy points last season. And again, a guy who kind of got overlooked for where he finished and what he does and what he brings to this team and organization. 25 goals, 35 assists. Like I said, career high 60 points, 147 shots. Seems to get the physicality in there as well. Maybe a player that gets overlooked and can get at a very sweet spot down the board.
Look, actually, Charlie Coyle was a guy that I took a shot on in my Keeper Dynasty League last year, Steele, at the end of the draft, and it paid off nicely for me. Do I think he is going to easily be able to replicate that? I have my concerns. Is he a sneaky good potential week-to-week fill-in? That's how I'm looking at him. I'd rather go with Elias Lindholm, in my opinion. Charlie Coyle for sure then comes off the board 6th. I'm going to take a shot on Elias Lindholm and hope that, as much as I'm reading into it and as much as I'm believing in a bounce back from him, because let's be honest, it didn't really work out in Vancouver. In 26 games, he only put up 12 points. The playoffs were the playoffs. However, I think Lindholm is going to get all the opportunity in the world to return to that form where he put up in Calgary. Maybe not 82 points, Steele. Maybe it's somewhere in between the 64 that he put up in his final full year in Calgary and the year before in 82. I think he falls somewhere in there. And given his opportunity to play with David Pastrnak on that top line, I'm reading into it even more. So for me, getting the ability to feed pass to that puck, why not 30, 40 assists or even more if Pass is going to be burying it like we think he is going to? This power play also, Steele, I dug into the special teams a little bit for this Boston Bruins club. They weren't as bad offensively as I thought. They were 13th in overall goal scoring. Pretty good, not great. The power play, came in at 14th as well. So I'm going to say a little bit of an uptick on power play, a little bit of an uptick in overall offense is going to come from Elias Lindholm. He slides in at number 5 for me, Steele. However, given that he's bounced around a little bit now, given the poor season last year, maybe it's a little bit safer to take a guy like Charlie Coyle coming off a career year. In my opinion, I'd rather read into the guy with the more track record, the guy with a bit more of an expansive skill set. I'm going with Lindholm, but I appreciate that you highlighted Charlie Coyle because he does deserve a lot of credit for a good year last year. I just don't know if he's able to replicate it. I'm going to say like 48 points, 55 points in that realm for Charlie Coyle, much more in the area of where he's been for his entire career.
Also for Elias Lindholm, the guy who's most likely going to be playing and centering David Pastrnak. So that's going to mean wonders for his fantasy value. So yeah, he, definitely interchangeable for me at 5 and 6 between those players. Can't hate at all with Elias Lindholm being there. Next guys in line, you're looking at Pavel Zacha on the left wing side right now. Then after that, honestly, I'm looking at Trent Frederick, who has some keeper league value to him, in my opinion. He, 18 goals, 22 assists. I'm not saying go get him right now, but he's on his way in a right trajectory. He's a banger league beauty, 204 hits last year, 123 shots. But you like to see the uptick of where his career has started and what he does in the game. He's a fighter. He goes out there and protects his teammate, 25 years old, 40 points last year. And he's improved his game, honestly, overall. 3 seasons ago, 18 points. Last year, 2 seasons ago, 31 points. And now 40 points in 82-game season, 69 penalty minutes, 204 hits, banger league beauty, like I said. So he can definitely get taken. He's a draftable player. You're not taking him until at least closer to the 200, 210 overall pick in your draft for Frederick. But I'm just looking at guys that you could take on the back end right now after the top 5 targets.
Deeper formats, depending on how many GMs, it's all going to depend on that. We got to get that cop-out out there, Steele, because it holds true. The strength of this team comes from the back end. It's quite clear. Swayman, Zadorov, McAvoy, Lindholm, Carlo, Lohrei, all these guys are big physical presences. This team is going to be hard to play against in its own end. Are they going to be able to run and gun with the likes of the teams that I already alluded to? Tampa Bay, Toronto, the Rangers, some of these squads that really do have a lot more balance up front. I am not going to come on here and say that this, like I did the last 2 years, Steele, and say this team is going to miss the postseason, because I think with Swayman and that blue line of beastly big boys, I know that's a lot of bees in Beantown, they will be a playoff team once again. Can they? Look, this is the 2025 NHL season, Steele. Offense aplenty, right? Young guns, studs, Can they keep up? Let's see what happens. The back end is definitely good enough to compete. Is the forward depth? Are some of these pieces that you just mentioned, Frederic, Poitras, Morgan Geekie, are they going to step up? Someone is going to have to, and hopefully it's one of the guys we got an eye on. Lots more to come the rest of the week and the rest of the month, and I'm hyped for our mock drafts coming up in a few weeks.
The Boston Bruins team overall might look a little different, but the culture remains the same. It has always remained the same in Beantown, in the Boston Bruins organization, no matter what happens. And that's just been one of their philosophies over many, many years, especially when they won the Stanley Cup back, over a decade ago. But look, that's just what it is. Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we're right. We've been wrong on the Boston Bruins. Hopefully we're right this season about them. I do agree with you. They're going to be a playoff team. However, do they finish top 3 in the Atlantic Division? We'll get to all of that and more later, closer to the season, when the season starts, when we break down all of our preseason predictions as well. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find them on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Have a great day out there. Good luck with your bets this summer, and we shall see you back here again on Wednesday.
Peace.